Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Split Software Twitch stream today. If you're not familiar with me or Split, I'm your boy, Chris Mars, Sultan Burnham on Twitter. Yes, Sultan Burnham on Twitter. We are here live in full effect at Dev Nexus in Atlanta, Georgia. If you're here at Dev Nexus, come by and say hi if you want to, or catch me after the stream. Split Software, feature management and experimentation platform, A/B testing, feature flags, canary release, doing amazing stuff over there. I am stoked to have everybody tuned in. And if you're not tuned in, hopefully you'll tune in. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're at. Got my water today because my allergies are something fierce. I keep going back to Michigan where it's a little chilly and then going to warm weather, and it's messing me up. But we're here and we are having a great time. It's Wednesday, middle of the week. We're almost done with it. Super stoked to have my guest today, Ben Myers. Thank you for joining me. I know we've moved this around a couple times for scheduling conflicts, but super stoked that you're here. So why don't you let everybody know who you are, what you're all about, man?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, if you notice any audio funkiness, please let me know because I'm doing some weird audio routing to support some automated closed captions going on. By the way, if you're watching this in Twitch, like on desktop, you can use the closed captions extension to access automated closed captions. That should be over the player. Otherwise, you can also go to benmyers.dev/captions. I can put a link to that in the chat as well. And that should also provide automated closed captions for you. So, anyways, that aside, howdy. My name is Ben Myers. For my day job, I am a front end developer at Microsoft. I work on Microsoft Learn, which is our developer documentation platform. You might previously have known it as Microsoft Docs, which itself was the successor to MSDN. So, I uh, there at Microsoft, I contribute largely to the front end interface of that, but with a focus on accessibility, as well as other factors such as internationalization and performance. Uh, I don't write the documentation, I just contribute to the interface. I also contribute to our internal design system that we use for Microsoft Learn. So, got tons of thoughts about where in the process accessibility goes. I also blog about accessibility. You can find things I've written at benmyers.dev. And I just kickstarted back up my own stream called Some Antics, which is a pseudo weekly stream where I oftentimes bring on guests from around web development and web design to teach something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way with a focus on accessibility and/or core web technologies. So that's who I am and where you've seen me about.
Awesome. That sounds amazing, Ben. You're doing great things over there. It's awesome, and we are going to schedule some antics one day. I know we've
Yeah,
talked about it and we've shot it around, but it's hard with guests and streaming, and everybody's always busy, and it's uh it's one of those
yeah,
things, you know. It's one of those
absolutely.
things. So, well, what are we talking about today? I think we're going to be talking about accessibility, right? Is that what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, I figure there's a ton of different angles we could take on that front. I think it's interesting to talk about accessibility itself. I also think it's interesting to talk about from like a meta perspective of like the ways in which we introduce people to and sell people on accessibility. Because I know you've done quite a bit of accessibility work
Yep.
in your own job. And I figured it might be fun to just kind of trade notes on that.
Yeah. Well, kick it off. Let's start. How do we make accessibility accessible for everybody?
Oh goodness. Okay, so you're talking about like how do we make accessible experiences?
Yeah.
That's what you want. Okay. Yeah, that is, as I'm sure you're well aware, a very big question, right?
Yes.
It starts with understanding that like there are just so many different user experiences that people are going to have, right? Because there are so many different kinds of users, and
Yep.
they like all have differing needs. So oftentimes you'll see in disability spaces, especially web accessibility, will kind of break disabilities up into several categories. Um, for instance, you've got your vision disabilities, so blindness, low vision, color blindness, for instance, are some examples of that. There's your auditory disabilities, so people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or people who experience auditory processing disorders, where maybe they can register that there is audio, but parsing meaning from that is difficult for them.
Right.
We have your there's your various mobility and motor disabilities. So, for instance, I have limb abnormalities. I have short arms, and I am missing thumbs. Right. So, ensuring that I can manipulate a device is part of that. You might also have people with arthritis or multiple sclerosis or like any number of things that might make it difficult for you to physically manipulate a device, or might require you to use like alternate controls. And then we often talk about cognitive disabilities. So this is a massive spectrum of experience here, but it could be anything from ADHD, which might impact your ability to focus and say sustained on a task for a long period of time, to any number of cognitive disabilities that might make it difficult for you to parse what you're reading, such as dyslexia, or even just your ability to comprehend complex interactions, right? And it's oftentimes very helpful for us to, in the accessibility space, break out these different kinds of disabilities, because they let us talk about different kinds of functional needs that might exist amongst our users. But an important thing to keep in mind is that, you oftentimes, like, first of all, no two people with similar disabilities experience their disabilities in the exact same way. And user preferences are absolutely a thing that exists. And also, people could be multiply disabled. They can have several disabilities at once that all kind of can create a unique concoction of functional user needs. And so in accessibility, our role is to understand the range of human experience and ensure that people coming from across that wide spectrum can use our products to their full potential. And oftentimes, sometimes we think like, oh, the thing I'm working on, not that important in the grand scheme of things, right? Is it really that important for a blind person to order pizza or something like that, right? This is a question that gets asked. Like, where's the priority? Does it really matter? But fundamentally, yeah, it does. Accessibility is a civil right. It's a human right. People deserve inclusion, right? That is the least we could do. And also, who are we to say that the things that we make aren't important to someone? But also, there are fields where absolutely we can point concretely to ways in which the accessibility work that we do has a measurable impact on someone's agency. I used to work in banking. I used to work at a bank. And one of the things that was drilled in our heads very early on is this phenomenon of elder abuse, elder fraud.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, as you age, oftentimes you are less capable of independently managing your finances, especially when the technology itself is not accessible to you, right?
Right.
And so oftentimes this puts you in a position where you have to rely on, younger family members or younger friends, younger people in your life. And this puts you in a position where you're set up to be exploited, because those people now have vast control over your wealth, right? And they can take advantage of you. And obviously, that's hugely harmful, right?
Yes.
And so anything we do to create an obstacle for someone to be able to independently manage their finances is itself, actively setting up people to be exploited. Or maybe, obviously banking, that's important, right? That's critical. Maybe someone's working on an API testing tool, right? Something like Postman, right? I can't speak to the accessibility of Postman, but let's talk about it in a hypothetical, right? What are the stakes of Postman being inaccessible? Well, Postman is kind of the tool, right, for API testing. There are others, but I mean, come on. Most companies are using Postman. And so that means that if Postman isn't accessible for people to use, If so, like people who use screen readers can't access Postman, they're shut out of, in many ways, an entire industry of work.
Yeah.
Those,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, those stakes are not trivial, right? So it's understanding that we have an impact and then accounting in every step of the process for people across this wide spectrum and diversity of user needs.
It's amazing. It's amazing to me how many people, like when I'm giving my talks on accessibility or doing workshops on accessibility, and I talk about these things, and I talk about the level of exclusiveness that is being done to such a huge
Mhm.
population of users and people and developers internally. Like when I talk about disabilities, I talk
Mhm.
about like you stated, I talk about mobile or not, sorry, yes, mobility disabilities, visual, hearing, cognitive, and I break those down kind of like how you did, field of vision, color vision deficiencies. When I talk about sensory neural hearing loss and conductive hearing loss, and a lot of times, people hear accessibility that aren't really in the space, and they think deaf and blind. It's one or the other. It's not just one or the other, right? You do have those mobility and cognitive disabilities. You have those temporary or situational disabilities that a lot of people don't think about. People don't think about um, parents with newborns, right? Like those things don't cross people's minds, and then you start getting into the visual, or not the visual, but the hidden impairments like ADHD and different types of anxiety, whether that's
Mhm.
harm anxiety, health anxiety, which I'm a health anxiety sufferer, diagnosed health anxiety with accompanying OCD. Like all of these things play a
Mhm.
big part, and then you start getting into the screen reader stuff when you have to do your testing for screen readers. If your application, right, or your tool, Postman for example, cannot be accessed with any type of screen reader, whether that's on a Windows machine, a Linux machine, or a Mac, you are leaving out so much for somebody to be doing, and really causing a lot of issues on a greater spectrum, uh,
Mhm.
for everybody. So, and people don't understand a lot of times, how to use a screen reader, and when it was like for doing testing,
Yeah.
and it really boils down to education. And people laugh when I say, when you're testing with a screen reader, they laugh when I say close your monitor or like blur the screen or throw something over it, because if you're reading what you're listening to, that's cheating, right? Put yourself in the user's shoes. So
Yeah, and I've been disabled all my life, right? And one of the things that I have picked up from my own experience as well as from, listening to other disabled people is like, you know, disabled people become power users of their assistive technologies because they have to, right? I oftentimes when you get, uh, developers who are sighted, right? And they're playing around in a screen reader. It's fumbling, right? Their experiences of fumbling with a screen reader. And they get this notion in their head that like screen readers are just terrible to use, right? Or they only dive in at the surface level, right? And when you do that, you make assumptions about how real people are using their screen reader based on your own faulty like understanding of how screen readers work, and this can lead to a lot of like really harmful things. It's in general, when you don't take the time to understand how people are actually using the page, you can do some really harmful stuff. I think the go-to example for me is um, developers get this assumption that keyboard users, especially screen reader users, are tabbing through the page. And I use that like specifically the word tabbing, right? They're assuming that you're hitting tab to go through all the things. And then they notice that, well, I tab, and I can't get to this paragraph of text. Therefore, that paragraph of text isn't accessible. So I need to like add a tab index to make it accessible. But they're wrong, right? Because there are other screen reader navigation mechanisms that they haven't taken the time to learn or don't even know exist that would handle that. And tabbing has like comes with it a very specific expectation that any regular screen reader user would know just by use of it, right? But when you operate off of a faulty half understanding of how the tools are working, you can create some really harmful experiences. Yeah.
No, that's 100% true. And I catch myself doing that as well. Like if I'm testing with a screen reader, a lot of the times I'm using tab, shift, control, option space, right? Sometimes the
Mhm.
arrow keys, and I'm trying to get around the experience and I can't figure it out because I haven't done my due diligence in really breaking down voiceover or NVDA or Orca if I'm on a Linux machine, right? But
Mhm.
if I can get most of the experience done and get through it, then I'll figure it out, right? But it's true. There are a lot of times where sighted users like myself are testing with a screen reader and can't get to something, but somebody who has a really robust knowledge of that can get to that thing. And it's like, damn, like how are you getting to this? Like I gotta use the mouse and or trackpad and like highlight it for me to get to it and then continue tabbing through for that experience. But that really boils down once again to the education piece of it with,
Mhm.
a lot of times testing in a screen reader, you're just going to tap through it as a sighted user when you're testing. Oh yeah. You're not going to take the time to really dig down deep and figure out how that tool works. But you have to do that. Like you
Yeah.
really have to do that because if you're going to be testing that experience, you need to be testing it like somebody that's actually, somebody that's using it that has to use
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I tell people like test like you're a power user because your disabled users already are, like out of necessity, they've learned this, right? So VoiceOver has a feature called the rotor. Um, every screen reader contains some form of this where you can navigate between different elements of a similar type. And the voiceover, which is Mac OS's screen reader, as well as the iOS screen reader, it has this in the uh, form of an experience called the rotor, which is it has like several panes that you can navigate through. So there's like a headings pane, so you can navigate through the page from heading to heading to heading. There's a linked one, so you can skip from link to link to link and so forth. And oftentimes, I have shown people the rotor, and because there is like a visual UI that's associated with it, so it can help sighted developers build a mental model of what's really happening here. Um, but yeah, I've shown people this, and they've been like, "Holy crap! I didn't know this existed." Right? And then suddenly we can point to, well, it does exist. Regular voiceover users would be so acquainted with this thing. How does that impact their experience? Well, if it's a valid experience for them to navigate from heading to heading to heading, suddenly your heading order matters a lot, right? What you consider a heading matters a lot because folks are building a mental model of your document outline as a result. Or if you can skip from link to link to link, completely independent of any of the like context, any of the surrounding text, suddenly your barrage of click here links actively are meaningless, right? And so you can start to extrapolate how using screen readers in very valid ways, um, even if they're ways that you as a developer might not have been aware of, can create themselves very confusing experiences. If you've followed bad practices.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally that you need to be following good practices like at all costs. And whether you have to like read the docs on how to use a screen reader or watch a YouTube video on how to use a screen reader or literally just sitting with somebody that is a power user. Like that one-on-one interaction
Yeah.
with somebody who's a power user and that can walk you through and talk you through and show you, right, how to use it. Uh like that experience right there is priceless.
So one of the best parts of my job right now is that every Tuesday and Thursday, I sit in on some office hours that are held across our organization. They're the accessibility office hours. People who have had accessibility testers file bugs against their projects. These teams don't always necessarily know how to handle those bugs, so they take their bugs to office hours. I like to just sit in on it. Um, and the office hours are helmed by accessibility experts, including very specifically blind and vision impaired screen reader users who are incredibly knowledgeable about the wide range of technology across the field. And so oftentimes what comes up is folks are like, well, I don't know what the clearest experience is. And these people will be able to go, well, if we liken it to, the experience that you see in, Microsoft Word, this particular experience, this seems to have strong parallels. folks might expect the keyboard shortcuts to be something like this. And that's that is building a strong foundation based on lived user experience. And I think oftentimes in the accessibility field, we can presume what that experience would be, but we don't know it until we are a disabled person who's using it in the wild, or we connect strongly. We form connections with those people. Chris, do you use Snapchat at all?
Every now and then, I'll pop on Snapchat if like close friends of mine are, posting stuff like that. But like, it was the same with TikTok. Like I went down a Snapchat hole one time. Like
Yeah,
I went down a rabbit hole, on
sure.
TikTok, and had to stop using it. But yeah, every now and then I'll pop
Okay.
in on Snapchat.
So I I I wear hearing aids, and my phone can Bluetooth connect to them. So my phone can stream audio to my hearing aids, which is incredibly useful for calls or if I'm watching TikToks or YouTube videos. But an important thing to notice is that like Bluetooth is kind of a flaky spec. It's a flaky process, and so when a Bluetooth device like my phone wants to pair with like and start streaming to another Bluetooth device like my hearing aid, there's usually a bit of a delay. Um, and in the context of my hearing aid actually goes quiet for like half a second before starting to play whatever audio my phone wants to play. And Snapchat is littered with these like micro audio cues, like these little pops to indicate that a message sent or a snap sent. Um, and so my experience of using Snapchat anytime the Bluetooth is enabled is I'll send a message to someone and the app will want to make this little popping audio cue. And so it'll tell my hearing aid, hey, I want to send you some audio real quick. Hearing aid goes, great, let's set that up. Hearing aid goes quiet. My sense of audio of my surroundings goes quiet. And by that time, the phone has already sent the popping sound. So my hearing aid never actually plays it, but my phone is done streaming some sound. So it goes, hearing aid, I'm done. Hearing aid goes, well, okay, I didn't pick up any audio, but I guess that makes sense. And so it goes quiet for half a second again. And then, like, I hear the real world. So every time my phone wants to send just that little popping sound, my hearing aid goes quiet for 2 periods of half a second, and I still miss the popping sound because my hearing aid couldn't connect fast enough. Like that is a lived experience of using Snapchat with my assistive technologies that I guarantee you, uh, accessibility practitioners within Snapchat wouldn't have been able to ever find out unless they have like a person who uses hearing aids in their process. Um, and so, yeah, lived experiences absolutely matter for accessibility.
Yeah, I've watched a buddy of mine, and he's blind. He works at I think he was the like chief technologist, one of like the chief accessibility technologists at a college in Michigan, and I had him as a guest for Global Accessibility Awareness Day years ago, and he was talking all about how a blind user, navigates the web, and it was just amazing to hear a screen reader from like go off for
Mhm.
somebody that's a blind user because they have it, so many like words per minute, and it's like da 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 da, 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 and they understand it. But a person like me who doesn't, I don't need a screen reader. It's like, oh geez, like what just happened here? But it's amazing to see that transformation on how the hearing gets better and the different senses get, they
Mhm.
take over when you lose that one sense. And it's funny too because they joke about putting it down and it sounds like how I'm talking now, and then they put it back up so they can run through it. It's just an amazing experience to see that, but it really humbles you when you actually get to visually see that, and to hear somebody using a screen reader because it's it's amazing. Like it's just an amazing experience.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah. Uh, so I think like accessibility itself can be such a broad field. So I guess I want to kind of ask you, like, how did you get into accessibility, and how did you get to a level of comfort with it? If I can ask you that question.
Yeah. So I started building on the web in 1996. So it was a young Chris. Young Chris
Okay,
started writing code.
I have to interrupt here. I
Yeah.
was born in 1996.
Oh, geez.
Okay, sorry, had to sink your hope of the world for a bit.
Oh
Please.
man, that's funny. Yeah. So like I'm old in web years. I like to say I'm old now. I just turned 37 a few weeks ago, but I'm old in web years, right? And when I started building on the web, like like all the books out there, like, well, the book I had at least, like there was no talk about accessibility. Like there was not an accessibility chapter. I don't think we really started kicking accessibility like into the broader atmosphere until maybe 10-ish years ago, I think. Like the books I had, they talked about, alt text and having alt
Mhm.
attributes on your images. And when you like using frames and tables, yes, I started back in the day when you used frames. It was kind of already assumed that those things were accessible because, we didn't really have divs back then. So they were kind of already accessible as it is. And I started getting into the conference scene after the meetup scene, and I started watching talks on YouTube from Marcy Sutton, and
Yeah.
she was talking about accessibility. And I'm like, oh, she was doing like great talks at like JS Conf and all of
Mhm.
these different like CSS Conf and all these different conferences. And I'm like, oh wow, this is an important thing that she's talking about, and nobody at the time was doing it. Maybe a
Mhm.
couple people, right? Leonie Watson and people like that, people in the accessibility space. But there wasn't a whole lot of people talking about accessibility. And I'd watch her talks, and she was doing amazing things. So I hit her up on Twitter, and her and I became friends. And she kind of kicked me to kick me in the butt to like do talks on accessibility, and I'd run my talks by her, and she'd help out with content, and that's kind of how I got started in the space. And I kind of looked around me and relate it to personal experience as well as family. My mom she's 66. She's got a handful of different types of disabilities. And if I can make, and I open up all my conference talks with my why, and she's my why, or one of my whys. And if I can make an accessible user experience for her at the end of the day, I've done my job as a developer. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because I'll always be a front end developer. I will always be a developer.
Yeah.
And like she still uses a flip phone. She doesn't use a computer. She comes from the old school typewriter days. Um, but yeah, I mean, if she did, and if she had a smartphone and she used a computer, like if if I can make the experience accessible to her at the end of the day, I've done my job. And it's the job of everybody that's building on the web. I tell
Mhm.
people all the time, if you have your hand in the web experience and it starts with design, but designer all the way to the VP of the
Yeah.
company or the team, right? It is your job to care. And if not, you need to find something different to do. You know what I mean? Like we're privileged that we make great money in this industry. That's just the way it is. Like
Mhm.
there's no qualms about it. But at the end of the day, we're changing lives. You know what I mean? That's powerful. That's strong. And when
Mhm.
you tell that to people in a conference talk or just in general, like in a hallway track, when you tell people you're changing people's lives, it makes them think,
Mhm.
and the light bulbs go off.
Yeah.
And then they start to think about what their why is. And it's extremely powerful. That's
I
how I got into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is so huge and crucial. Like, um, I I don't know if if you check like web development Twitter or whatever. I think there's this like huge emphasis. I would say probably an overemphasis on the tools that we're using. But the truth is, if you work in the front end space, whether you're a developer, whether you're a designer, whether you're a product owner, right? Your job is not slinging around React or Astro or Next or JavaScript or even HTML or CSS, right? Your job is creating interfaces that people can use, right? If you're not here to do that, like I would absolutely encourage you to reconsider your priority, right? Um, and this gets to the heart of like when I when I teach accessibility, obviously there are some people who don't see it as like that high a priority. But by far and away, the people that I run into do care. And maybe this is just a bubble I found myself in, right? But they like, I think very few people enjoy knowing that a thing they made might not be usable by someone, right? And I think oftentimes you can set people up to go down a road of accessibility by showing them the ways that, like, you know, if we imagine this person and you probably know this person in your life, how might they struggle with this, right? You might have even been this person, right? If you're using your phone one-handed because you're holding your baby in the other hand, right? How might you use this gesture, right? How might you scroll down the page or interact with this bit? And I think that people are broadly receptive. Uh, in general, the biggest obstacles I actually see, very few people are actively like opposed, but the biggest obstacles I see are people aren't sure how to prioritize the work, or they feel like other things take higher priority, or they don't know where to start. And I don't know. One of the things that I have appreciated seeing in the accessibility industry more and more is an acknowledgement of progress over perfection, right? It's like you can take steps to remove access barriers today, right? And your experience will be far more usable. It won't be perfect, and there will still be people you're excluding, and it's important to keep working on it, right? But don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. I think this really, really bears out when you see the results of things like WebAIM Million. Have you seen the latest WebAIM Million, Chris?
I don't think I've seen the recent one.
It goes, if you've seen any of the like previous ones, right? It's exactly as you would expect. It's the same thing, right? Um, Huge swaths of the web are like they have and maybe if you could post a link to it, that would be great. But what this is, for anyone who's unaware, is an organization called WebAIM, which puts together a lot of accessibility resources. Every year or so, they analyze the 1 million most popular homepages across the web, and they do some automated scans to determine what automatically detectable accessibility bugs can be found on those homepages. So absolutely acknowledge like there's the limitations of what automated testing can do, right? But that's what they're doing is they're checking for these, and what they're finding is year after year, right? The six like these million homepages are continually plagued with like six hyper common accessibility bugs. By far and away, there's color contrast issues, right? But then on top of that, you get things like empty links and buttons, which means that, for instance, if you're using a screen reader, that screen reader won't convey the intent of those links and buttons. Or if you've got unclear text inside those buttons, right? The screen reader is not going to really help because you don't have the surrounding context. There's things like the HTML document doesn't have a lang attribute set on the HTML element, and so screen readers don't know what language to load and how to pronounce things in, right? These are kind of silly bugs, right? Like they're hugely impactful for people, especially things like color contrast and unclear links. But like they're incredibly fixable. This is You could be doing so much more. You could reduce so many access barriers if you just cleared like these six things, and they're fixable. We know how to solve them. We have automated scans for these. We have color contrast checkers, stuff like that, right? Like this is overall a fairly solvable problem. You could prioritize this for, a sprint, and you'd at the end of the day have an experience that so many more people could access, right? And so I think about that a lot, right? It's like some accessibility problems are just kind of due to the nature of complex interactions, but then some are just really low hanging fruit like this.
The low hanging fruit is something I like talking about. I think the most because I give multiple different talks on accessibility, and one that I give is called um, what is it called? It's called Common Accessibility Pitfalls. climbing out when you fall in. And it's all about low hanging fruit, right? And it's always the low hanging fruit that's overlooked. Always, it's the color contrast. It's the user flow and how like a user is going to tab through the experience. It's using ARIA properly and not using it when you don't need it. It's the first part of all of it is using semantic markup and not spoiling the experience with a bunch of divs all over the place, and making sure that you have alt attributes within your image elements. Like those are all those low hanging fruit things that are so overlooked all the time, that when you run automated testing, doing audits, they're painlessly you can painlessly fix those things, right? And it can clear up so much of the auditing errors in those experiences, but there's just one of those things that's overlooked the most.
Yeah, and I also think that it's so important to point out that these are things that can be tackled at a systemic level, and they should be. They need to be, right? So I'm a huge proponent of design systems. For anyone who doesn't know, a design system is basically it's an agreed upon source of truth for how user interfaces should look across a given brand and how they should behave, right? And so, if we're running into things like color contrast issues, well, a design system lets designers encode this information of like, we know that, this shade of white is accessible against this shade of blue, for instance. And so when you use our button that is that blue, like color contrast should just work out of the box, right? And also, if we learn different things, if we learn that, oh, actually, this wasn't as good contrast as we thought, it gives us a centralized place where developers and designers can update that source of truth. And so people can continue to use and consume the design system without necessarily needing to be privy to all of the like accessibility backstory that went into it. It just works. It's an out of the box success story, And I think that a lot of times in accessibility, we don't necessarily do a great job of addressing how we can tackle accessibility at a systemic level, because I don't know that it's sustainable to say every front end developer needs to become an accessibility expert. They should be aware, but like ultimately, like we need safeguards in place to ensure that like they don't fall into pitfalls. If you use our processes, if you use our tools, things should more or less work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love design systems too, but I mean, there's also a lot of design systems out there that A, aren't accessible, or B, like are really accessible. But like you were saying, it goes to this like the systemic level, like that like level, right? And
Yeah.
regardless if that's like digital accessibility or not. We do have a question in the chat from my buddy John Tenney. So John's father has multiple issues, hearing, mobility, stuff like that. And his question is, and I'd like to get your take on this, that
Yeah.
how possible would it be to have standards set in place where he could purchase a phone, tablet, etc., that is set according to his accessibility barriers? I think that is powerful. Like I would love to be able to see that one day.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Okay. So first of all, mobile devices do have quite a few accessibility features. They aren't always advertised, and they're not oftentimes on by default, right? And that itself is an issue. And so better onboarding and better communication about the tooling that already exists, I think, would be huge. And so just to say, like, we are part of the way to addressing what John is asking, right? There are options baked in for a lot of these things. I think it would be incredibly cool to have a way, like when you go into the phone store, I think having more or less a questionnaire of like, what would you like? In general, personalization is a huge thing in accessibility, right? Because different people have conflicting access needs. And so having an experience that works like tailored to you, I think is absolutely like that is long term what accessibility looks like for me, is ensuring that you can get exactly what works for you. I think it would be what I'd love to see is maybe like a standardized questionnaire of, hey, like, what font size works for you here? It's like, would you like small text? Would you like large text? I think some of these questions probably are already included in the like device setup process. But having them surface early on, like even before you start with any of the like surrounding stuff, like already when you get your phone, like it asks you what language, because if you don't get the language right, the user cannot proceed further unless the default language, I'm putting default in air quotes because across human language there is no default, but the default language, if it doesn't align with the language you're most comfortable with, you can't get further, right? But I think we should understand that, like, setting up the device for vision accessibility, for instance, like that is also the kind of thing where it's like if the text isn't large enough to start, you cannot proceed further. I think that there, broadly speaking, needs to be better communication around assistive technologies and compatibility with different devices. So one of the reasons I like my phone, I use an iPhone. One of the reasons I use an iPhone and why I cannot really leave the Apple ecosystem for phones is because Apple invested really, really heavily into hearing aid technology. And so there is a whole swath of hearing aids that are, quote, MFI, which is made for iPhone. So they are specifically, this is a trademark process, basically. They're set up to be, like, maybe somewhat compatible with other hearing aids, but really the extreme compatibility, the best experience is going to be if you're using it with an iPhone, right? And if you haven't been in the industry for a while, or if you haven't identified as deaf or haven't recognized that this is a need that you have that you would like to pursue solutions for, you might not know that there is a whole class of hearing aids that are built with specifically iPhone technology in mind, right? And that maybe the iPhone ecosystem has more to offer, right? But I also think that, it is, from a very cynical perspective, quote, not cool, as they say in the industry, that, Apple could have a monopoly on such a great experience, right? Like, Apple would never do it, but we need open standards for ensuring that assistive technology can, broadly speaking, communicate well with the phone industry. Because, I think back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines has 4 overarching principles for what makes content accessible. And the 4th is robust, which they use to mean, like, it doesn't matter what browser, operating system, device, assistive technology you're using, it should all just work. Another fancy word for that is interoperable, right? I should be able to plug and play my tools as much as I need to get the experience that works best for me. And I think, broadly speaking, we don't want to set people up for, oh, you've gotten a hearing aid. Now, if you want that to work to the best of your ability, you have to also get an iPhone. Surprise! Maybe you don't agree with Apple, but this is the best thing for you and your needs. You should be able to plug and play. Okay. I do see that John now says once he gets a phone, he's tried to have one in the past, but once he gets home, he has to spend a large amount of time setting it up and talking to tech support to find the changes he needs to make. Yeah, I think there needs to be like a standard questionnaire, like while you're at the phone store too, or if you're ordering the phone online, right? Like I've ordered my computer online. There should probably be, a form, a questionnaire that's like, hey, how would you broadly like us to set this up out of the box? That would be interesting to see as well.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think we ended on that. I think that was a great question. Thanks for asking, John. I hope we did get it answered for you. If not, where to get a hold of me, Tenny. You can also get a hold of Ben on Twitter if you have any more questions. You can always talk to me, John.
Over here.
Is right here. Yeah. Tenny knows how to catch me. Tenny knows where I'm at. We only live 20-ish minutes away from each other, so if we have to meet up at Louis Pizza, we will. But yeah, no, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to chat and talk. we'll do this again. Definitely, we'll do it again on Split's channel. We'll do it on your channel.
We got
Is
it.
there anything that you want to plug before we end the broadcast today?
Yeah, let me drop some links in the chat. But if you want to follow Some Antics, that's twitch.tv/SomeAnticsDev. If you want to follow me on Twitter, if Twitter is still your platform of choice, twitter.com/BenBMyers. If instead you're of the Mastodon variety, I'm on there too. I'm at Ben on the A11y.info instance. And yeah, I don't know. Follow me around. I'll plug my website as well, benmyers.dev. I blog about accessibility. But yeah, if you need to get a hold of me, those are the places to do so. If you want to engage with my content, those are the places to do so as well. But this has been this has been great, Chris. I'm so glad we got the chance to do it, and I'm sorry that it's been so wishy-washy schedule-wise.
It happens. It happens. We're busy people. You know what I mean? We're making the world a better place.
There we go.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you again. Once again, thank you. And we'll talk later. Catch y'all later.
All right.
See ya.
Bye, y'all.